The story began quietly, a voice clip, a few private messages, and whispers in Facebook groups that would soon ignite into a wildfire of accusation and disbelief. At the center of it all stood one man, Brian, a content creator who had positioned himself as both a defender and informant in the ongoing saga surrounding the Whittaker family. For months, Brian had cultivated a following by claiming inside access to the family situation, an understanding of the disputes between Patrick, Eric, and those who had raised money through online platforms in the Whittaker's name. His tone was authoritative, his confidence unwavering. He spoke as though he knew more than anyone else, as if the truth ran directly through him. And then, one clip changed everything. A short audio recording began circulating online, first in small groups, then on YouTube, then on the broader network of pages that followed every twist in the Whittaker case. In the clip, Brian could be heard telling a woman named Amy that his nephew was best friends with the state trooper assigned to the Whittaker investigation. He claimed he had access to confidential details. He claimed he knew how much money had been raised and where it had gone. He implied that the law was quietly closing in on the people involved. It was bold, specific, and, as it turned out, completely false. When the recording surfaced, the community erupted. The Whittaker story had already been marred by controversy, accusations of exploitation, financial misconduct, and manipulation. But this was different. This was one of the loudest voices in the conversation, admitting on tape that he had direct connections to law enforcement, and that those connections had confirmed allegations of fraud. It didn't take long for fact-checkers, fellow creators, and angry viewers to start digging. Within hours, inconsistencies began to appear. The nephew Brian spoke of didn't exist. His two sisters, both childless, had been open about that fact for years. The supposed state trooper friend? No record, no link. Nothing to suggest that any such connection existed, and then came the confession. In a hastily filmed response video, Brian addressed the growing uproar. The tone was defensive at first, nervous but self-assured. He looked directly into the camera and admitted flat out that he had lied. "I said it off the dome," he began, his voice shaky. "It wasn't true. I was trying to sound credible." He explained that the lie had come out of frustration, a moment of weakness, he called it. He said he had been trying to impress someone, to make himself sound like he had real access, that he was a legitimate voice in a crowd of speculation. "I just wanted to be taken seriously," he said. "That's all." But by the time he made that statement, it was too late. The damage had been done. The admission only deepened the outrage. Viewers who had once trusted him were now calling him a manipulator, a fraud, and worse. Many accused him of using the Whittaker family's tragedy to boost his own online presence. Screenshots of old messages began surfacing. Comments resurfaced from weeks prior where Brian had spoken about inside information and sources in law enforcement. Each one was now being held up as proof of a pattern, that this wasn't just one lie, but part of a larger effort to construct an image of authority and insider access for a community already divided by suspicion. It was the last straw. Supporters of the Whittaker family, tired of the drama and the exploitation, began distancing themselves from Brian. Other content creators, some of whom had once collaborated with him, released their own statements condemning his actions. Amy, the woman who had leaked the audio, claimed she had done so because she couldn't stomach the deceit any longer. She said she had once trusted him, believed in his sincerity, but realized that behind the scenes, Brian was using the situation for attention. "Every message he sent me," she said in her own video, "was about numbers, about who was watching, about how he could be the voice people trusted. He didn't care about Betty or Larry or BJ, he cared about clicks." Behind all the noise, the Whittaker family remained silent. Betty and Larry, still living through their own private battles, were unaware of the full scale of what was unfolding online. For them, the internet was a distant echo, a world that had taken their lives and turned them into stories, arguments, and profit. But for those who had followed this saga from the start, Brian's lie represented something deeper. The final collapse of credibility in a space already drowning in rumor. The irony. Many noted was that Brian had built his platform on criticizing others for dishonesty. He had called out Patrick. He had accused Eric. He had positioned himself as a truth-teller among liars. Now, he stood as the very thing he'd claimed to expose. His followers began to dwindle. His comment sections turned hostile. Longtime supporters demanded accountability, some urging him to take a break, others demanding that he leave the story entirely, but Brian didn't disappear. He continued posting not with the same confidence as before, but with a tone of wounded self-righteousness. He insisted that this one mistake didn't erase his contributions. He reminded people that he had raised awareness, that he had defended the family against online harassment. He said he had always meant well. Still, his explanations fell flat. For many, his confession wasn't a small misstep. It was the mask slipping. It showed the truth about the growing cottage industry around the Whittaker family, the creators, the commentators, the advocates who had turned compassion into a brand. The community had become a marketplace of narratives. Each creator claimed to have exclusive updates, verified sources, or behind-the-scenes access. Each one framed their videos as advocacy, as truth-telling, while audiences clicked, commented, and shared. Brian's lie was just one among many, but it was the one that broke through the noise. It was too blatant, too confident, too easily disproven. In that one moment, the illusion cracked. What followed wasn't just outrage toward Brian, it was a reckoning. People began asking harder questions about everyone involved. Who really had access? Who was really helping? And who was just profiting from the pain of a family that had become internet famous without ever asking for it? By the end of the week, the story had spread beyond the usual circles. A few larger commentators, some from outside the Whittaker community, weighed in, using the scandal as an example of how social media had blurred the line between journalism, gossip, and entertainment. "This is what happens," one of them said. "When empathy becomes content, you stop helping people, and you start performing help." Brian's name became shorthand for the toxicity that had overtaken the community, a cautionary tale about credibility and ego. But even as he lost trust, he refused to step away. In his next live stream, eyes red, voice unsteady, he said, "People can call me what they want. I still care about that family. I'll still tell their story." To some, it sounded like conviction. To others, it sounded like delusion. Either way, one thing was clear: the damage was done, and the truth, or what was left of it, was no longer in his control. The days after Brian's admission felt like an earthquake that refused to stop rumbling. One by one, creators, moderators, and page admins who had once worked alongside him began releasing statements, screen recordings, and receipts. The story had escaped the confines of small discussion threads. It had become the main headline across the entire Whittaker community. What had once been a quiet ecosystem of voices debating the morality of intervention in the Whittakers' lives now turned into a public tribunal. And Brian, whether he liked it or not, was the one on trial. For years, the Whittaker family's story had drawn people in, a mix of fascination, pity, and controversy. Their world was small, isolated in the mountains of West Virginia. And yet, through the internet, millions knew their names. Patrick had introduced them to the public eye with his documentaries, filming their lives, their quirks, their struggles, and the world had responded with a mix of awe and unease. The Whittakers were unique, but their fame came at a cost. When the cameras stopped rolling, others stepped in, promising to help. Some sent money, some offered homes. Some, like Brian, offered attention, but with that attention came exploitation. Brian's lie about the state. Police wasn't just a fabrication. It was a spark that reignited every suspicion people had about the entire web of advocates surrounding the Whittakers. His words made viewers question whether anyone had been honest, whether any of the fundraising campaigns, interviews, or updates were genuine, and the deeper people dug, the more tangled it all became. One Facebook group, dedicated to supporting the Whittaker family, suddenly locked its posts after screenshots leaked showing private arguments about where donations were going. Another creator, once an ally of Brian's, deleted their page entirely after old messages revealed backroom deals and revenue splits from monetized videos everywhere. Trust was collapsing. Amid the chaos, Amy, the woman who had exposed Brian's voicemail, released a longer statement. In it, she painted a damning picture. She claimed that Brian had reached out to her months earlier, asking for her help to build credibility around his reporting. He allegedly wanted her to pretend she had inside connections so he could verify stories through her. "He told me word for word," Amy wrote, "if I sound connected, people will listen. Once they listen, I can make real change." But he wasn't talking about helping the Whittakers, he was talking about growing his following. She included screenshots, messages about views, analytics, and strategies to stir up engagement. It was the final nail in the coffin for Brian's credibility. At first, Brian tried to fight back. He posted short clips claiming that Amy was twisting his words, that her screenshots were edited, and that she was jealous of his audience, but the tone had shifted. Every word he said now seemed like another lie. Viewers weren't listening for truth anymore, they were listening for mistakes, inconsistencies, signs that he was unraveling. In one live stream, his eyes darted nervously between the camera and his notes. He insisted that the trooper story had been a misunderstanding, that yes, he had lied, but only to protect a source who didn't want their name out there. Moments later, he contradicted himself, saying the source didn't exist. Then, a minute later, he said the real story was still being investigated. It was incoherent, and yet, as chaotic as it was, people couldn't look away. In the comment sections, theories multiplied. Some believed Brian had been working with Eric all along, that the lie was a distraction from deeper involvement in the alleged financial misconduct. Others speculated that Patrick himself had encouraged the story behind the scenes to turn public attention away from his own actions. No one knew for sure. What everyone agreed on, however, was that the situation had gotten out of control. By this point, the West Virginia State Police, the very institution Brian had falsely invoked, released a brief statement after being contacted by reporters. The statement read, "The West Virginia State Police has no known relationship or communication with any private individual claiming to represent or have access to confidential information related to the Whittaker family. Any such claims are false." That simple confirmation sent shockwaves through the community. It was no longer speculation, it was official. Brian had lied. And now, the state police themselves had said it. Behind the scenes, moderators of multiple Facebook groups started banning discussions about him altogether. They labeled the topic toxic, warning members that Brian-related posts will be deleted without notice. The irony, though, was that every deletion only made the curiosity grow. People began reposting screenshots on Reddit and TikTok. Someone compiled a timeline of Brian's statements, cross-referencing each one with video uploads and comments. The timeline showed a clear pattern of exaggeration, manipulation, and contradiction stretching back months. In one instance, Brian had claimed he was in contact with Patrick daily. In another, he said he hadn't spoken to Patrick in weeks. In one video, he said Betty had personally thanked him for his help. In another, he said, "I don't even need their thanks." To the casual viewer, it looked like normal inconsistency. But to those who had followed the story for months, it was damning. He had built an empire of half-truths, and now it was collapsing under its own weight. Meanwhile, the Whittaker family continued to live their lives, mostly unaware of the digital storm around them. But the people closest to them, those who had physically visited their property, those who had handled donations or deliveries, began to distance themselves from anyone associated with the online chaos. Patrick reportedly told a friend in a recorded conversation, "I don't even know who's real anymore. Everybody's saying something different." Even Eric, who had often been accused of stirring controversy himself, commented publicly on Brian's scandal, saying, "This is why you can't trust outsiders with our name. They all use it for clicks." It was a rare moment of agreement among people who had spent months at odds. In a surprising twist, another voice entered the conversation. Donna, a former volunteer who had helped organize donations for the Whittakers 2 years earlier, She released a statement of her own, claiming that Brian's lie was symptomatic of the larger sickness infecting the community around the family. "Everyone wants a piece of the story," she wrote. "Everyone wants to be the hero who helped, but the truth is, most of them helped themselves." This stopped being about compassion a long time ago. Her post went viral. Thousands shared it, praising her honesty. Others accused her of hypocrisy, pointing out that she too had monetized content related to the family. Still, her words struck a chord. They highlighted what many had already begun to feel, that the Whittaker saga had become less about the people in it and more about the audience surrounding it. For Brian, though there was no recovery, the pressure was too much. Days after the state police statement, he deleted his social media accounts. His YouTube channel vanished. His Facebook page was wiped clean. The last thing he posted before disappearing was a short message on his community tab. "I'm done. You win. I hope you're all happy. I never meant to hurt anyone." It was the digital equivalent of a white flag, but even as his accounts disappeared, his story didn't. His videos were re-uploaded by others, dissected in commentary clips, turned into reaction content. In an age where nothing ever truly goes away, Brian had become both villain and cautionary tale, a man who built himself on a lie and then drowned in it. For those who still followed the Whittaker updates, the Brian incident had left a bitter taste. Every new post, every new creator claiming to speak truth was now met with skepticism. The community had learned the hard way that attention could be dangerous, and that even good intentions could be twisted by ego. In one particularly telling moment, a commenter wrote under a viral post, "Brian lied because he wanted to feel important. But all he did was prove that none of these people actually care about the truth. They care about being first to say it." That comment, simple as it was, summarized everything. The story of the Whittakers had stopped being about survival or empathy or even justice. It had become a mirror, one that reflected back the greed, chaos, and hunger for attention in the people who claimed to care. Still, the most haunting part of all wasn't the lie itself. It was how easily people had believed it. One man had said he had a nephew in the state police, and hundreds had taken it as gospel. They wanted to believe it. They needed the drama, the sense of insider knowledge, the illusion that they were part of something important. It wasn't just Brian who had lied. It was the entire ecosystem that had allowed it to thrive, the clicks, the shares, the gossip disguised as concern. And even after his downfall, the cycle continued. Weeks later, a new creator uploaded a video titled, "The Real Truth About Brian's Lie." Another made a 45-minute expose on Amy's motives. A third claimed to have exclusive proof that Brian was framed. The same audience that had torn him down now flocked to new voices, hungry for the next layer of conspiracy. The names changed. The tone shifted. But the energy stayed the same. In a small mountain town hundreds of miles away, Betty Whittaker sat on her porch, oblivious to the online war unfolding in her name. She was thinking about groceries, about laundry, about the old car Patrick had bought that still sat in the driveway. To her, the internet wasn't a battlefield. It was background noise, a world that had borrowed her name and turned it into a never-ending story. And somewhere, miles away, Brian watched it all unravel from behind a private account. The glow of his phone reflecting off his tired face, he wanted to post again. He wanted to explain, but for the first time, he didn't. He just stared at the screen, reading the comments. As his own words echoed in his mind, "I just wanted to sound credible." The silence that followed Brian's disappearance didn't last long. In the chaotic vacuum he left behind, the entire Whittaker community online began turning inward, devouring itself from the inside out. The very people who once championed truth and justice for the Whittakers now started accusing one another of manipulation, grifting, and betrayal. At the center of it all, Brian's lie still lingered like smoke, invisible to some, choking to others. It wasn't just about the false state police connection anymore. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with the movement that had grown around the Whittaker name. In the weeks after his final post, Screenshots, archived clips, and deleted comments began resurfacing everywhere. Anonymous users compiled entire Google Drives filled with receipts, PayPal records, deleted messages, Cash App screenshots, even voice clips between creators. Names that had once been synonymous with advocacy, people who claimed to protect the family, were now revealed to have been accepting donations, striking sponsorship deals, or selling exclusive updates behind paywalls. And at the heart of every argument, Brian's name kept appearing. Brian told me to say that. Brian said he'd verified it. Brian said the cops were involved. He had been the glue connecting the factions, and now that glue was melting, everything was coming apart. Amy, the woman who had leaked the original voicemail, found herself both praised and attacked. Some saw her as a whistleblower who had done the right thing. Others accused her of betrayal and clout chasing. She had revealed the truth, yes, but in doing so, she had also pulled the mask off an entire network of self-proclaimed advocates. In one viral livestream, she read aloud from a series of messages Brian had sent her months before. "If people think I've got a line to the police, they'll believe me. Once they believe me, I can clean this whole thing up. Eric, Patrick, all of them. Someone has to take charge." When she read those words, her voice trembled. "He really believed that," she said softly. "He thought he was saving them. He thought lying was leadership." That single sentence hit the community like a hammer. Because underneath all the anger and disgust, there was a darker realization. Brian wasn't the only one who believed that. Every creator who had stepped into the Whittaker story had convinced themselves they were the one who could fix it. Patrick had wanted to share their story. Eric had wanted to protect their name. Brian had wanted to save their reputation. Each believed their motives were pure, until the attention, the views, the donations began to blur the line between help and hunger. The more people cared, the more power they felt, and when power mixes with empathy, it's easy to mistake control for compassion. That was the real story now, not the family itself, but the ecosystem of exploitation orbiting around them while the internet was busy arguing. The Whittaker family's real life continued quietly in the hills. The house still stood, the roof still leaked, and Larry still sat on the porch every morning with his cup of coffee. Betty worried about her health. BJ drifted in and out of the picture. Ray called occasionally but stayed distant. They were still poor, still proud, still trying to live without understanding why the world cared so much. But for the people who claimed to represent them, things had gotten ugly. A major blow came when YouTube demonetized several channels that had built their entire identities around Whittaker updates. It wasn't out of moral concern, it was because of mass reporting. Thousands of users had flagged their videos as misinformation and exploitation. One creator posted a furious rant. "Y'all think you're helping, but all you're doing is silencing the people who cared." Brian lied, "Yeah, but that doesn't mean we all did." The irony was lost on him, because for many viewers, it no longer mattered who lied or who didn't. The entire space had lost credibility. Every new post, every exclusive update, every thumbnail with Betty or Larry's face felt tainted by manipulation. The audience wasn't watching with empathy anymore. They were watching with suspicion. Somewhere in Ohio, Brian sat in the passenger seat of a borrowed car, scrolling through comments under a re-upload of one of his old videos. He didn't comment, didn't post, just watched. He saw people dissecting his apology, analyzing his tone, mocking his nervous stutters. He saw strangers call him a pathological liar, a sociopath, and a fraud. But he also saw a few comments defending him. At least he cared. He was trying to do the right thing. Everyone's just looking for someone to blame. He lingered on those. He wanted to believe them, because in his own mind, the lie had never started as a scheme. It had started as survival. When his views began slipping, when newer creators started taking his audience, when his credibility was questioned for the first time, he panicked. The lie about the state police wasn't planned. It slipped out like a reflex, an instinct to stay. Relevant in a digital world that devoured relevance by the hour, he told himself it was harmless. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself it would keep people watching long enough to hear the real story, and then before he knew it, the lie had become the story. In one of the few remaining group chats that hadn't imploded, a creator named Tammy wrote, "It's weird, isn't it? Brian's gone, but it's like he's still controlling everything. Every time we talk about him, we're still giving him what he wanted, attention." Another replied, "He's not the disease. He's the symptom. The whole system is sick." And they weren't wrong. The internet had created a machine, a self-feeding loop of outrage, speculation, and emotional investment. The Whittakers' poverty, their isolation, their humanity, it had all become fuel for content. And in that machine, Brian had found his role. He was never the first liar. He just became the most visible one. Then came the biggest twist. A post surfaced from a local news outlet in West Virginia. They had reached out to law enforcement regarding claims made by a social media personality who said he had inside connections. The police response was short and blunt: "No citizen, including any person identifying as Brian, has had access to or communication with the West Virginia State Police regarding any private investigations related to the Whittaker family. Any such claim is categorically false." For the first time, it wasn't just social media turning against him, it was the institution he'd lied about. That single sentence was the nail in the coffin. Even those who had defended him fell silent. But while the internet moved on, Brian didn't. He began messaging old contacts again, quietly, carefully. He wanted to set the record straight. He told some that he'd been misunderstood, others that he'd been sabotaged. He floated the idea of making a documentary to expose the real corruption behind the scenes. No one bit. Most left him on read. Some posted his messages publicly, laughing at his persistence. Others ignored him completely, unwilling to re-enter the chaos. For the first time in years, Brian found himself without an audience. And for a man who had lived through the lens of one, that was the cruelest punishment of all. Weeks turned into months. His old videos continued to circulate. Cut into sound bites and memes, he became a punchline, a cautionary tale shared in other communities. Whenever someone started embellishing their sources, but in certain dark corners of the internet, a small group of loyal followers remained. They called themselves Truthers for Brian. They believed he had been framed. They believed Amy had fabricated the messages. They believed the state police had denied his connection to protect themselves. Brian was silenced, one post read, because he was getting too close to the truth. And just like that, the cycle began again, the lie reborn, reshaped, branded. Meanwhile, the Whittaker name continued to drift through the algorithm like a ghost. Videos about Betty's health. Speculation about BJ's whereabouts. Updates on Larry's new car. Each one monetized. Each one wrapped in sympathy and clickbait. Brian might have been gone, but his shadow remained, not because of what he said, but because he'd revealed something everyone already knew but didn't want to admit, that the truth didn't matter as much as the story. One evening, Brian walked through a grocery store, hoodie up. Keeping his head low, he heard two people in the next aisle whispering, "You remember that guy who said he knew the cops? The liar?" "Yeah, what happened to him?" "He vanished. Probably hiding." Brian froze. He smiled faintly, not out of amusement but exhaustion. They didn't know he was 5 feet away. They didn't know he could hear every word. He realized in that moment that no statement, no video, no apology could ever erase the label he now carried. He wasn't Brian the advocate anymore. He wasn't Brian the whistleblower. He wasn't even Brian the liar. Would you like me to now merge this with the earlier section? He was just Brian the man who became the lie, and yet deep inside, part of him still believed he could fix it. He opened his phone that night and began typing a new post, one last message to his old followers. "You think you know the truth, but you don't. What happened wasn't what it looked like. I'll explain everything soon." He hovered over the post button for almost a full minute, then, slowly, he deleted it. He set the phone down, leaned back, and exhaled. maybe, for once. Silence was the only truth he had left to tell. Months had passed since Brian's name last trended. Yet his presence lingered like a whisper in the corners of the internet that refused to let anything die. The storm had quieted, but the damage it left behind was permanent. The online world that had once claimed to protect the Whittaker family now resembled an empty stage, the audience gone. The lights dimmed, the story exhausted, but somewhere beneath the surface, the echoes of that chaos still moved. The lie about the state police had not just tarnished Brian. It had poisoned trust across the entire community. What had started as advocacy had turned into accusation. Creators who once united to help the Whittakers now eyed one another with suspicion. Every new voice that emerged was greeted not with support but interrogation. "Are you another Brian?" became the question everyone asked. Meanwhile, in rural West Virginia, life returned to its quiet rhythm. Betty sat by the window most mornings, watching the road that led down into town. The house had seen better days, patched in places, still creaking in the cold, but it was home. Larry kept himself busy fixing small things that didn't need fixing, and the car Patrick had bought still sat in the driveway, its paint dulled by dust and time. They didn't talk much about the internet anymore. It had brought them attention and donations, but also confusion, judgment, and pain. People they'd never met had argued about their lives as if they were characters in a series, not human beings living through poverty and loss. And though they couldn't name every person who had spoken for them, they all remembered Brian. "Wasn't he the one who said he talked to the police?" Betty asked one evening, her voice low. Larry just nodded. "He talked too much," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the window. "None of them ever came here to listen. They just talked." Back online, the world had moved on to new stories. The algorithm didn't care about closure. It rewarded novelty, the next family, the next mystery, the next controversy. But a few creators still revisited the Whittaker saga, picking apart the past like scavengers. One video titled, "Where's Brian Now?" made the rounds, claiming he was living under a new name, possibly planning a return. Another claimed he had been silenced by higher powers. A third simply replayed the original voicemail, the lie that started it all, overlaying it with dramatic music and captions about the cost of fame. The irony was brutal. Even in disgrace, Brian's voice still generated clicks. The remaining community members who had once believed in him were divided. Some defended him as a flawed man who'd made a mistake out of passion. Others called him a narcissist who exploited tragedy for profit. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. Brian's downfall had exposed something far larger than himself. It revealed how easily compassion could be commercialized. It showed that in the age of social media, sincerity was currency, and a lie told with conviction could buy more of it than the truth ever could. People had wanted heroes and villains. Brian gave them both. In a small apartment far from the mountains, Brian watched one of those very videos on his phone. The title read, "The Lawyer Who Loved the Whittakers." He watched himself speaking, the same clip that had gone viral months ago, his younger face animated, confident, sure of itself. The version of him before the collapse. He didn't recognize that man anymore. His phone buzzed with a message from an old follower. "We still believe you." "Brian, they can't hide the truth forever." He didn't reply. He just stared at it, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Before locking the screen and setting it face down, for the first time, he didn't want to defend himself. He didn't want to explain, justify, or repair the lie. He was tired, not from guilt alone, but from the weight of performance. Every sentence, every apology, every explanation had been another act in a story that had long lost its meaning. The truth was that Brian's lie had been small compared to the system it exposed. The real fraud wasn't the story he invented about the state police. It was the illusion that any of them, from YouTubers to self-proclaimed advocates, could ever truly represent the Whittaker family's reality. They had turned their suffering into storytelling, their silence into speculation, their humanity into content. Brian just happened to be the one who said the quiet part out loud. By spring, The Whittaker story had faded from headlines entirely. A few diehard pages still posted the occasional update, but the public had moved on. The family, as they always had, continued to endure, not through charity, not through lies, but through the quiet resilience that had defined them long before a camera ever arrived. Betty laughed one afternoon as Larry tuned an old radio. Static filled the air, and for a moment she thought she heard her name. Then it was gone, just noise. She smiled faintly. "Ain't no one talking about us anymore," she said. Larry nodded. "Good," he replied. They didn't know that somewhere miles away. A man who once claimed to speak for them was sitting in a darkened room, finally learning the same lesson. Some stories aren't meant to be owned. In the end. Brian's legacy wasn't the lie he told. It was the truth he revealed by accident. That, in a world built on clicks and compassion, sometimes silence says more than any story ever could. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.